Welcome back to the Future Leader Forum, where we help you to co-create the future of leadership. My name is Dr. Nick, and my co-pilot is Yatin Soni. And today we have somebody very, very special in the studio, Trevor Naidoo, who is a thought leader in the future of procurement and leadership. So Trevor, thank you so much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership.
Thank you for having me in the studio.
But before we walk into the future, can you tell us a little bit about your own background?
Yeah.
Where did you grow up?
Well, I'm a Durban boy. I was born in Durban, and I grew up in a township called Chatsworth. So that's where I'm actually from.
And what was your dream career when you grew up?
Interestingly enough, I loved teaching, or I loved going to school. And so in my younger years, I thought it was a great job because when it was time for us to be on holidays, the teachers were also on holidays as well, while my dad was working. So I thought it was a great career to be in. But coming from an Indian family, my dad said, look, you either choose to become a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer. And I ended up choosing engineering. So, yeah.
So Trevor, who inspired you in your early days?
I'd say it's probably two groups of or sets of people. The first, from an education point of view, it would be my uncle. He was a professor at one of the universities in Durban, and he had studied engineering. So he encouraged me to take up engineering because he felt that engineering was one of the future skill sets that was going to be required across corporate South Africa, across corporates around the world. And it was primarily the skill that you gain with engineering is how to solve problems. And so he convinced me to take up engineering. When it comes to entrepreneurship, basically my entire dad's family were in entrepreneurship of some sort. Some of them had major businesses that were running. Some of them had informal businesses that they were running. And that's where I got the bug for entrepreneurship.
Now, Trevor, you have a very impressive career, both in corporate and entrepreneurship. Looking back over your career, would you say there was a major turning point?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I think very early on, despite studying engineering, I knew that I wanted to get into entrepreneurship, and that's where I wanted to make an impact. And so when it came to engineering, I studied industrial engineering, and one of my professors encouraged me to actually go into multiple sectors so that I could increase my breadth of knowledge and understanding of how supply chains worked. So that led me on a path where I was doing 2 to 3 year stints at different blue chip companies across South Africa. And it gave me a really good foundational understanding of how corporates work and how supply chains work. So that was the first turning point, is to actually go on that path to get multiple industry understanding. The second turning point was I had, in between all of that time, tried a number of businesses, and I had failed. And I couldn't understand why. And one of the reasons was because I was trying to apply business principles that my dad and his brothers and our extended family were doing in a different marketplace. And I didn't understand that at that time. And then I started a piece of work with FirstRand, where I got involved in procurement. And it opened up my eyes to see that business, how I understood it was being done versus how it was done in the corporate sector, it was two completely different worlds. And that opened up my eyes to the amount of opportunities that sat for entrepreneurs that really could offer disruptive and innovative solutions. So once I understood the market I wanted to play in, the next turning point for me was when I then joined a social impact organization where I was helping entrepreneurs to grow their businesses. And the biggest standout point for me there was they had innovative, disruptive solutions that could not just benefit corporates, but society at large. And their biggest problem was they were struggling to get into corporate supply chains. My role then shifted, because of my procurement experience, to then go and develop strategies for blue chip corporates to help them try and incorporate more supplies into their supply chains. And what ended up happening there was we would build these amazing strategies for blue chip corporates. We'd come back a year later to see all of the results. And lo and behold, they were still sitting with less than 10% of their supply chain being transformed with local suppliers. And that's when the light bulb hit me, was that it's not a lack of want, it's actually a lack of knowing how to go about doing it. Because what sat within these organizations was procurement best practice methodologies or supply chain methodologies would generally say that you need to rationalize your spend with 1 or 2 big suppliers, But what's actually needed for innovation, for growth in the economy, is for you to unbundle that spend. And on the face of it, it looks like it's oil and water. But when you look deeper, that's the foundations of where true disruption and innovation takes place that benefits the economy, corporates, and everyone involved in the ecosystem at large.
So, Trevor, what is driving you today?
I think, I think what's important for people is I believe everyone needs to have a mission in which they, put their resources, their thinking, their talents into a specific mission. I believe my mission is to try and help create sustainable businesses, not just in South Africa, but Africa at large. And how I feel I should be going about doing that is by using my talents, which is procurement and supply chain understanding, to help corporates to unlock their supply chains for local businesses. What's driving me to do that is that I think as a human race, there's a growing divide between the haves and the have-nots. And when you look at any economy, a successful economy worldwide has a very strong middle class where there's almost like a diamond shape. So you have the wealthy, the aristocrats, but you have a very strong working class, and you have less and less of the poor LSMs. But in order to do that, we need to access supply chains. And why that drives me is if we want to move forward as a human race, if we want to increase our collective consciousness, we need to have people that are not looking at how do I survive and get money for the next loaf of bread. We need to raise that, like saying a rising tide raises all ships. If we have that philosophy, then I think that is going to help the human race as a whole, and that's what drives me, is to how do I play a role in helping uplift humanity in that manner.
Thank you.
Great stuff. So you're watching the Future Leader Forum, and we're here with Trevor, Managing Director of ProcureSense. And Trevor, tell us on leadership.
Yeah.
What does the future of leadership mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's some foundational truths that will last forever in leadership, and these are foundational principles. I think the one of the big roles leadership needs to play is always creating a compelling vision and mission, and with a purpose that's back behind that. So when you have that in place, the next thing that you need to be good at is how do you translate that vision into a strategy? And once that's solved, with leadership, all leaders have limited time. So how do you identify the right types of initiatives to go about executing against the strategy which will help you fulfill the mission? That's one of the fundamental skill sets that all good leaders have had throughout the ages. Where it's changing, so that still exists, and where it's changing is, your mission and your vision now doesn't just need to incorporate a financial lens. It needs to be very purpose and meaningful driven, and it needs to have a social impact. And that's driven by the demographics of the people, the millennials, who are focused on purpose and meaning. The second aspect of how that's changing is historically you would look at your strategy or your mission every 10 years or so. With the pace of the economy, the pace of change, it's required for you to actually look at it a lot more. Your frequency needs to change. It needs to be a lot more frequent. I'm not saying your mission should change every second day, but your initiatives and how you're trying to get to that goal needs to be an iterative process, and leaders need to adopt that in their process. So I'd say that's the first thing. It's one of the core fundamentals. I would say the second thing is to remain agile and flexible around leadership. And what's driving that is the pace of change in society at large. We're sitting with a workforce that now is going to become, the majority of them will become millennials, and the traditional structures around how good business is done, culture, etc., that paradigm, there's a big shift in that, because the workforce of the now and the future have different priorities and perspectives of how they look about from a perspective of meaningfulness and their roles within it. So your ability to be agile and flexible in everything that you do, how you think, your vision, how you communicate effectively, how you adjust to things, is super important. So I would say that's the second or third thing. I can't remember where I am on the count.
That's two.
And then that ties into the next thing. The fourth thing is your talent pool. Like as a leader now, it's so important to understand how important your talent pool is. And there's two things for me specifically. Like, so historically, you just needed to look at, like, we're going to hire the best MBA students from, you know, the most prestigious university, etc. It's moving beyond that now, where the skill sets of the future that are required don't necessarily need a traditional MBA person. And the problems that need to be solved in society and in corporates right now, you don't need necessarily that training. I'm not saying it's not important, but you need different types of training. The other thing with the talent pool is that in order to foster innovation, you need to have a diverse talent pool that represents the demographics of the market that you're playing in. Why that is important is because if you are correctly representing the demographics, that's where innovation comes from. A simple example I'll give you is, let's take the insurance industry as an example. So traditional insurance industry would have life policies, etc. What insurance companies now, one of their biggest areas of revenue is funeral policies, right? Now, when you look at the demographics within our country, that's actually for the lower LSMs. That's a need for the lower LSMs. The fact that insurance companies are now incorporating their talent pool to reflect our demographics has created all of the needs and the realization there's opportunities that sit in here. So that's why it's important to really think about your talent pool from a demographic point of view and an inclusivity perspective. And then the second thing is to say, yes, okay, you have an MBA, that's great, or you have a qualification. What are the skills that we need to capacitate you on for the future? Because of the pace of change, the future is much closer than what we think. And how do we develop the thinking and the problem-solving capabilities within our teams or our talent pool so that they are themselves agile and flexible to adjust to the market as a whole? So I'd say that that's sort of like the fourth thing or the third thing. I'm not sure. What's also important is technology, right? And I think what's happening is, if I use a soccer analogy, we all love soccer here. You know, Liverpool's philosophy is that they are a very high-pressing team, which means that they're very aggressive. You can't half-bake that, right? So you're either high-pressing or you're not. And when it comes to technology, what I've seen leaders currently doing right now is like they're trying to half-bake it. Like, no, we embrace technology, but they still want to practice by the old ways. And where that's coming from, for me, is not understanding technology. And so one of the key skills that future leaders need to do is to really embrace technology and understand the components of it. And then how does that technology integrate into the marketplace that I'm playing in right now? How do I use it effectively to upskill and to keep my talent pool engaged? And so technology is a vital part, like understanding it with, like, what does AI mean? You know, the fourth industrial revolution. These are all catchphrases, but what's the understanding of it within my sector, and how can it benefit not just my organization, but how can I use it to disrupt and add value to more organizations? The next thing I would say, I probably want to share three more things as I'm thinking through it, is globalization to localization is probably what I'd call it, right? So with the advent of COVID, what it's done is it's actually opened up the entire world to most businesses and to most leaders. An example of that is, if you run a training business that focuses on professional development, historically you were competing with training businesses that did the same thing in South Africa, right? But now with COVID, you're actually competing with the likes of Tony Robbins, etc., worldwide businesses. And what that requires from a leadership perspective is a change of mindset. And that impacts your vision, your mission, your strategy, and how you go about implementing. How do you position yourself as a global business? At the same time, what COVID's also done is that a lot of big corporates and leaders would deal or have strategic relationships with other global businesses. And that's hurt their ability from a supply chain perspective, when restrictions were in place. It's made a lot of leaders rethink, how do we go about ensuring that we can continuously secure supply and demand of our commodities or goods that we need to produce our services or products. And that's forcing leaders now to start looking at, I'm thinking globally, but I have a localization mindset. And so it's almost as if it's two separate things, but it's a global mindset with a view on how do we go about globally moving into different markets, but having a local mindset, and how do we partner with the right people to make sure that there's no disruption to our supply chain. So I'd say
about being globally present but locally relevant.
Yes, that's actually a great way of putting it.
Right.
All of those things that I've mentioned above requires a shift in thinking. And I'll touch on one point specifically around thinking, and it's what I call ecosystem thinking. And so if we go back to the 80s and we look at leadership and how it was done, was you needed to go about thinking about, how do I have a colonization type of perspective? I'm going to be this big guy, and I'm going to go and, basically roast everyone else in the market and dominate it. And then we moved to the 90s and the 2000s, where that was now being reflected with technology-based businesses, and they went into this similar thing. What's happening now, and you're seeing it with, Black Lives Matter, all of these things, the customer base is saying, well, it's not just about providing a service, right? We're thinking about the environment. We're thinking about all of these other things. And that requires you to think with an ecosystem mindset. So, within the value chain, where am I as an organization adding value, right, to that ecosystem? And who are the other players, and what value do they add? And how can we combine, collaborate, partner to make 1 + 1 = 3? And I think as leaders, that type of thinking is becoming more and more prevalent, or should become more and more prevalent, to start adding value beyond just the first tier of value adding. So I'd say that's it. And then the last and final one I would say is servant leadership. So there's plenty of talks on YouTube, and people talk about servant leadership. I think to use an analogy, like an average leader thinks that his team works for them. A great leader believes that he works for his team. So there's a lot of talk around it, but what does that mean practically? For me, it's how do you as a leader create the culture within your organization, and the environment where you are ensuring that it's a diverse group, and that they have a voice that's heard, and that they're confident enough in their capabilities that you're building, where they can have direct input into strategy, into different initiatives, etc. And what that means for me is that, as a leader, servant leader, is what role do I play in all of those areas to go about ensuring that this team member actually creates their full potential within this organization. And if it means that once that purpose is done and that season is over, for them to be let go into the world to benefit the world in a different way, having that servant leadership for me is how do I go about doing it? So I would say I'd stop there. There's tons of other things, but I'd say those would probably be the 7 things. Yeah.
You've touched on something really important, and we at the Future Leader Forum, we're big on conscious leadership, which is servant leadership. And the new definition of leaders should not be measured by the number of people he leads, but the number of followers he has.
That's very good. Yeah.
That's how it goes. So your story is inspirational. Knowing you and your organization, you've had an incredible journey from the township of Durban through corporate, now into a successful entrepreneur. But tell me, along your journey, or tell us rather, along your journey, what is the most important thing that you've learned that can help build future leaders?
Yeah, another good question. I think there are a number of catchphrases around this. You need to have perseverance, determination, and grit. Those things are important, right? What's been important for me that's linked to that is, how do you sustain that, right? How do you sustain being perseverant or being having grit, etc., and that's your tribe, right? And I think one of the biggest things that has helped me is the people that I've surrounded myself with, and that's family members. Some of them I've unfriended, if that makes sense, because they're not adding value to what I'm doing. That includes friends, and that also includes peers and colleagues within the sector that I'm working with. That for me is the fuel that ensures you keep on persevering, you have the grit, because as entrepreneurs, as leaders, we will have our down days. Some of the things that we're thinking about or trying to execute, we'll have our naysayers. And to have a support structure is exceptionally important, because leadership is at times a lonely road. Because you're the one taking the first steps in a new direction that everyone is apprehensive of, scared of, etc. And you need a support structure around that. That, however, is meaningless if you don't have a belief in yourself. And where belief in yourself, I think what I've learned is you need to have a very strong identity of who you are as an individual. Not everyone's going to like you. You're not everyone's cup of tea. And I think earlier on in my career, I would find someone that I resonated with. I was like, wow, this is an amazing person, and I would try and mimic and copy all of the things that they do. At that time, I didn't understand personality profiles. I didn't understand my purpose fully, and so I would try and mimic it, and I wouldn't be authentic. And what I've recognized is that, part of belief in your ability, who you are, is it stems from your identity. And your identity is a mixture of, your family, your culture, your upbringing, what you've done to work on your mindset, your spiritual beliefs, all of those things. If you have that foundation, that's where the belief comes from. And if you've got the support structure, that's where perseverance, determination, and grit comes from. I'd say the two other things that would really help with leadership is, and I'm speaking from an entrepreneurial perspective, is I would say have the mindset of a child. And what I mean by this is, kids are curious. And as a leader, if you want to continuously innovate, disrupt, be ahead of the game, you need to have a curious mindset. And what that means as well, the second thing that it brings is a childlike mindset is it kills the ego. So as you're moving up in the leadership realms, whether you're in a corporate environment or you're running a business and your business is growing, ego can be the biggest stumbling block, because you've done this, you've had all of these successes, and now what if you fail now? And having a childlike mindset diminishes that ego, keeps it in check. The ego is not all that bad. It's required for certain things, but I think that's really important. To have that. So I would say those are the things that have served me well. Yeah.
No, thanks for that, Trevor. Now, in this day and age, especially post-pandemic, social media has become a very important part of life, of business. Yeah. We're certainly very active on LinkedIn in our business. But what is your advice to future leaders in terms of how they should use social media to build their personal brand?
Okay, yeah. So I think social media falls under the gambit. It's a technology, right? So it's a form of technology. And I think the first thing I would suggest to leaders to identify the technologies or technology platforms that resonate with their mission and their vision and strategy as a business. So I'll give you a simple example. If you're a B2C business, then Facebook, Instagram, other things like I can't remember TikTok. The name of it now. Take a lot. Those kind of things would better suit your business. Yeah. You're a B2B business. You need to think about other platforms like LinkedIn, etc. So that's the first thing, is to understand, what type of business are you in? Where are the people that you want to connect with? Where do they engage? What social platforms do they use? And how can you leverage off the abilities the social platform provides you with, in order for you to go about, creating more value for your customer base and then accessing more potential clients, right? So that's the first thing you should understand. The second thing then is, okay, well, once you have a high level understanding of which platform you want to use, then it's how do you upskill yourself to proficiently use the platform, right? So, and there's two ways in my mind of doing that. One is DIY, and that can be a very painful process, because a lot of these technology platforms, social media specifically, have become very sophisticated in the manner in which they work. So one way is doing that, and that's trial by error. Nothing wrong with that. Another way, which we've adopted, is to identify the right subject matter expert and to help them guide you through the process, so that you're learning faster and you're learning from their failures and what they've seen in the market. Okay. Once that is understood, then I think an important thing is, social media is just a platform. What is extremely important is authenticity around that. And that is the premise of, like, how are you authentic to who you are as an individual, your identity, your mission, your purpose, who your organization is, and how do you go about now effectively representing that through the social media platform. So I would say that, that's my advice around social media.
That's very powerful. These days, many behind their social media avatars forget who they are. Yeah. They just so, focused on being who they want their followers to believe they are.
Exactly.
And they forget themselves. Yeah. So authenticity is really important.
And it's a sixth sense. We all have it as human beings, right? We can smell it, like something's not right. You may
True.
fool someone for a while with your social media presence, but after a while, it will become very clear
Absolutely.
that your social media profile and who you say you are versus who you are as an individual,
There we go.
it doesn't correlate. And it's extremely important. The other reason why it's important is I can have a conversation with you today, and that conversation is gone. You'll remember it,
Yeah.
but I have the chance to make up for it. Once it goes onto social media, it almost lives there forever and
that's it.
indefinitely. And so it's important that you remain authentic to who you are as an individual.
Good.
And that's important. And I would say the third thing is, if you're going down that route, what I've learned from my experience is that like any good thing, it takes time and perseverance, and you need to be disciplined in what you're doing. And in order to do that, you need to associate value to it.
Good.
Now, Trevor, these are challenging times, especially for future leaders. Can you maybe zoom into one obstacle, one challenge that future leaders need to be aware of, that they need to keep in mind as they progress throughout their career?
I would say mindset would sort of encapsulate probably the 7 points that I raised earlier in terms of the skills that's needed for future leaders. It requires a very malleable, adaptable mindset. But in saying that, it needs to be grounded by certain principles and foundations. So, when I say malleable, it's like if you are super agile, you'll basically fall for anything and everything. So that's where your identity as an individual, your mission, those are the cornerstones. But you need to have a mindset that is agile and flexible, because the pace of change in the economy is so fast today that you may have said, okay, this is my strategy, I'm going in this direction. You need to be flexible enough to be able to change to say, actually, the market is going in this direction. And that stems from your mindset as an individual and how you go about thinking about things. That is one of the biggest challenges.
Now, Trevor, you mentioned a number of skills that are required by future leaders to succeed in this new economy. If you were to teach just one skill from your own experience that's relevant to future leaders, what skill would you teach?
I'm going to give you two, right? One is problem solving. I think problem solving has served me well throughout my career, and we are facing new problems now that has never been encountered in economies, and it's challenging the status quo of how certain solutions fit in. So I would definitely say problem solving. On a human level, I would say we need to upskill ourselves on human skills. So technology is all around us, everything is moving around, but how do we become better within like the human skills, negotiating, communicating effectively, inspiring people? Those are all skill sets that are required, and I would say those would be my top two.
Thank you. We're looking forward to hearing more from Lecturer Naidoo.
Good. All right. So, Trevor, as a business owner and a leader, you're a mentor to a number of future leaders. Can you give us a story about a success story? Can you share a success story about one of your mentees?
I'll share one that comes to mind immediately. It's one of my favorites. Is a guy by the name of Cabello. He approached me, and he has a passion for dancing, right? So he's a skilled ballroom dancer, and at the time he was working at a retail organization, and after hours he would go and teach people. He came from a township like myself. He couldn't speak English. He taught himself how to speak English. He taught himself how to read so that he could read books on structure, positioning, form within dancing, etc. So I was super inspired by his story. And when we got to know each other, he actually said to me, I want to become an entrepreneur. Would you help me? And through a series of discussions, I guided him and helped him. And I was a bit surprised as to the pace at which he went to go about doing it. This was a 3-month process since we met. He'd quit his job and he's like, Trev, I'm going and I'm going to be doing this. And it's been 2 years now. He's still going strong. He's gotten a massive client base. He's following his passion and his purpose in life and doing what he loves. And that for me is one of the stories that sticks out because we're still friends. I still speak to him on a weekly, monthly basis to guide him on his business. And he's got clients across Johannesburg right now. So that's one of my favorite stories.
Excellent. Trevor, some advice to the future leaders. Who are some of the role models that you recommend future leaders follow and study?
I'll share my philosophy on leaders and how I go about doing it. early on, I would try and link to one person and mimic them because I was still trying to find myself. And now that I'm clear on who I am, I know I'm not everyone's cup of tea. What I look at is I try and find the right types of skills or abilities within a group of leaders that I like and I think is going to add value to who I am as an individual. So I look at people like Elon Musk. I even look at people that have passed on, Nelson Mandela, etc. What are the key things that they were exceptionally good at, and how can I incorporate that into my leadership style without diminishing who I am, my identity, because I believe everyone's created uniquely, and we should celebrate that. So that's my view on leadership. So I look at different people for different things.
Thank you.
Now, Trevor, how can our listeners connect with you, and where should they follow you?
Yeah, so they can follow us on LinkedIn. So I've got a LinkedIn profile. You can just search my name, and you can follow me on LinkedIn. And then we've got a website as well. So it's www.procuresense.co.za. And that's where they can find us and engage with us.
And last but not least, Trevor, what is your message to the millions of kids out there who are now soon going to leave school and who are now considering their career? What makes for success in this new economy? And what would you tell them? What should they focus on?
I would say focus on entrepreneurship. I think entrepreneurship is the future. And within entrepreneurship, or even if it's not, and you want to follow a corporate career, is always deliver value. If you constantly deliver value and you have that in your mindset, you will go and upskill yourself with the skills that you need to go about delivering value. And that is the currency of the world. It's value. So that would be my advice to them.
Awesome.
Thank you. Well, Trevor, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
It's
your
great
insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership, and helping us to build a very important component of leadership, which is procurement and transformation.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And we will see you at the next episode of the Future Leader Forum.